The courtroom went so quiet that I could hear my mother crying into a tissue 2 rows behind the plaintiff's table. Not soft crying either, the kind meant to be heard. The judge had just finished reading a single page from the mortgage file when she stopped, lifted her eyes, and looked straight at my sister. "Mrs. Cole," she said, her voice flat and careful, "why does this email say your sister was never present for the signing?" For 1 second, nobody moved. Not my father in his Sunday suit. Not Melody with her hands twisted in her lap. Not even me. Then Melody's face crumpled. She covered her mouth, shook her head, and whispered, "Wait. Please. It wasn't my plan." My father turned so fast his chair scraped the floor. The bailiff stepped forward. And I sat there, perfectly still, because 6 months earlier, if you had told me my own parents would drag me into court over a mortgage I never agreed to pay, I would have said you were insane. But that was the thing about betrayal. When it comes from strangers, it hurts. When it comes from family, it rewrites your whole understanding of reality. My name is Sienna Brennan. I'm 32 years old, I'm a CPA, and until last year I honestly believed the worst thing my family thought about me was that I was too cold, too careful, too unwilling to just help when it mattered. I didn't know they were willing to forge my signature. I didn't know they would put me on the hook for $480,000 so my younger sister could move into a 4-bedroom house she couldn't afford. And I definitely didn't know that when I said no, they would sue me and tell the court I had promised to pay every dollar. That hearing, the one where the judge froze mid-sentence and Melody started sobbing, didn't begin in a courtroom. It began much earlier, with a family that always loved one daughter more gently than the other. And with 5 words my mother said on the phone that I still hear when the apartment is too quiet at night. "We decided you should pay. If you know what it's like to be cast as the difficult one just because you have boundaries, stay with me." To understand that courtroom, I have to take you back to the beginning. Growing up in the Brennan house, there were 2 daughters, and everyone, neighbors, teachers, relatives, knew which one the spotlight followed. Melody was the golden child. She had that easy warmth people trust immediately, the kind of smile that made waiters bring extra bread without being asked. At family dinners, she laughed at my father's jokes before the punchline even landed. She helped my mother in the kitchen, remembered birthdays, hugged people a little longer than expected. People described her the same way every time. Such a sweet girl. Meanwhile, I was quiet. Not shy exactly, just someone who felt more comfortable with numbers than conversations. I liked things that made sense, spreadsheets, patterns, answers that didn't shift depending on who was speaking. While Melody collected compliments, I collected A's. When I passed my CPA exam at 26, I called home thinking maybe this time there would be pride in my father's voice. Instead, he said, "So when are you getting married like your sister?" Melody had married Derek Cole at 24. By 28, she had 2 kids and a house full of toys, photos on the fridge, and my parents helping with rent every month. Checks sent quietly. No questions asked. When I graduated with student loans, I paid them off myself. No one offered help. No one even asked. Every holiday followed the same rhythm. My mother would sit on the couch with one of Melody's kids bouncing on her knee, laughing, glowing the way grandparents do when the future feels secure. Then her eyes would drift toward me, and she'd give that soft, disappointed smile. "You should learn from your sister," she'd say gently. "Melody knows how to make people love her." I used to wonder what that meant. For years I thought maybe she was right. Maybe there was something missing in me, some warmth, some softness, something that made people want to choose you instead of tolerate you. But as I got older, I started noticing something else. The rules were different for me. Melody could ask for anything, and people called it love. When I said no to something unreasonable, suddenly I was selfish, cold, ungrateful. If you've ever been the one in the family who had to grow up early while someone else got to stay the favorite, you probably recognize that feeling. The quiet understanding that no matter how responsible you are, somehow you're still the disappointment. I didn't know it then, but those differences were about to become very expensive. The first time Melody asked me for money, it sounded small. $15,000. She called on a Tuesday night, voice light and apologetic, explaining that her car's transmission had failed and Derek's hours at work had been cut. "It's just temporary," she promised. "6 months, tops. I'll pay you back before you even notice." The problem was, I had noticed something before. She still owed me $8,000. From the last temporary emergency. Money that had quietly disappeared into the background of family life like it had never existed. So I said no. Not harshly, not dramatically, just calmly. "I can't do that again, Mel." There was a long pause on the phone. Then she sighed in that disappointed way people do when they want you to feel like you failed some invisible test. "Wow," she said softly. "Okay." That same night my mother called. Crying. Actual tears. "How can you be so cold to your own sister?" she asked. Cold. That word again. 6 months later, Melody called with another request. This time it wasn't money. It was a lease. Her landlord wanted a guarantor because their credit score wasn't strong enough for the new apartment they wanted. "It's just paperwork," she said quickly. "You wouldn't have to pay anything unless something really bad happened." Which, in financial language, means exactly the opposite. If something bad happened, I would be legally responsible. So again, I said no. And again, the silence came. My father didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. No calls. No texts. Nothing. Then came my nephew Tyler's 5th birthday party. I couldn't go. A major client audit at work had moved forward unexpectedly, and missing it would have put my job at risk. I called Melody to apologize and sent Tyler a big Lego set he'd been talking about for months. That night, Melody posted something on Facebook. "Family should always come first." Sad when some people forget that. 47 likes. 12 comments agreeing with her. Aunt Patricia wrote, "Some people only care about themselves." I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the app. That was the night I created a folder in my email. I called it Family Requests. Every message went into it. Every loan request. Every guilt trip. Every moment where my no became evidence that I was somehow the problem. Not because I planned to use it, but because when enough people tell you you're selfish long enough, you start needing proof that you're not crazy. I didn't realize then that folder would eventually save my life and expose something far worse than family drama. It would expose a plan. A plan my parents and sister had already set in motion without telling me. A plan worth nearly $500,000. The envelope almost went straight into the trash. It looked like junk mail, plain white, standard bank letterhead, my name printed in that stiff, impersonal font financial institutions love. I was sorting the day's mail over my kitchen counter when something caught my eye. Second notice. That made me pause. I opened it absent-mindedly, expecting some marketing credit offer or maybe a mistake. Instead, the first line froze the air in my apartment. "Mortgage payment overdue." For a second, my brain refused to process the words. Mortgage? I didn't have a mortgage. I rented a small apartment in Denver. Quiet building, 3rd floor. Nothing fancy but exactly what I wanted, simple and predictable. Then I looked at the property address listed below. 4847 Willowbrook Lane, Lakewood, Colorado. I had never heard of Willowbrook Lane. My stomach tightened as my eyes moved further down the page. Outstanding balance, $480,000. Cosigner, Sienna M. Brennan. The paper felt heavier suddenly, like it had gained weight in my hands. I read the line again. Then again. My name. On a mortgage. For a house I had never seen. My fingers were already dialing the bank before my brain fully caught up. After 3 automated menus and 6 minutes of hold music, a woman finally answered. "Mortgage Services, this is Angela speaking." I forced my voice to stay steady. "Yes, I'm calling about a notice I just received. There must be some mistake." "What's the account number on the letter, ma'am?" I read it to her. I could hear keyboard clicks as she pulled up the file. Then she said something that made my knees feel weak. "Yes, Miss Brennan, I see the account here. You're listed as the co-signer on the mortgage for that property." That's impossible, I said immediately. I never signed anything. There was a pause. I do see a signed application in the file, she replied carefully. The documents were notarized on September 15th last year. Notarized. Someone had watched a signature go onto paper and officially stamped it as legitimate. A signature I had never written. For the record, I said slowly, who are the primary borrowers? More keyboard clicks. Then she read the names. Harold Brennan and Melody Brennan Cole. My father. And my sister. In that moment, something cold slid through my chest. Because there are only two ways your name ends up on a mortgage you never agreed to. A mistake. Or a decision someone else made for you. And suddenly, I knew exactly which one this was. If you've ever opened a letter that changed everything you thought you understood about your life, you know the feeling. The room looks the same. But nothing is the same anymore. That night I called my mother. And 5 words came out of her mouth that I will never forget. We decided you should pay. My mother answered on the 3rd ring. Cheerful, casual, like nothing in the world was wrong. Sienna, what a nice surprise. I didn't return the greeting. Did you put my name on a mortgage? Silence. Not confusion, not shock. Just silence. 3 seconds. 4. Long enough for my stomach to drop. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. We were going to tell you. Rustling sounds came through the phone, and then my father's voice replaced hers. This is family, Sienna, he said. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter. What exactly does that mean? It means Melody needed help buying a house, he continued, sounding irritated that I wasn't immediately understanding. You have a good job, you're doing well. We decided you should help. Decided? That word echoed in my head. You decided? I asked slowly. Without asking me? My father sighed like I was being difficult. We raised you, he said. We paid for your upbringing, families support each other. I laughed then. Not because it was funny. Because the absurdity was overwhelming. You paid for Melody's college, I said. I paid off my own student loans. That's different. How? You were always independent, he replied. Independent. Another word for on your own. My mother's voice came back onto the line, soft and trembling. Sienna, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder. You forged my signature, I said. We didn't forge anything, my father snapped. We just used your name on the paperwork. That's literally forgery. You're being dramatic. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I thought maybe they didn't understand how serious this was. Then my father said something that erased that possibility completely. We already used our retirement for the down payment. The words hung there, heavy. If we lose this house, he continued quietly, we lose everything. And there it was. The real story. They had gambled their future on Melody's dream house. And I was supposed to cover the bet. You're 32, he added after a moment. No husband, no kids. What do you even need that money for? Something inside me went still. Because that question wasn't really about money. It was about value. I hung up without answering. Some questions don't deserve a response. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I started researching. Mortgage liability. Credit damage. Collection lawsuits. Foreclosure records. Every article I read made the same thing clear. If that loan defaulted with my name attached to it, my credit could be destroyed for 7 years. My career in finance could collapse. Everything I'd spent a decade building could vanish. And that's when I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a family conflict anymore. It was a financial disaster. And if I didn't fight it, I might lose my entire future. Before we go further, I want to say something quickly. If stories about protecting your dignity resonate with you, subscribe and stand for dignity. This space exists for people learning how to say no without apologizing for it. Now let me tell you about the phone call I made at 2 in the morning. Because that call is what turned this from a nightmare into a case. At 2:07 a.m., I called the only person I knew who might understand how bad this was. Marcus Webb. We'd been study partners back in college, two exhausted accounting majors surviving caffeine and spreadsheets during tax season. While I went into corporate auditing, Marcus had taken a different path. Real estate law, mortgage disputes, fraud cases. In other words, exactly the kind of nightmare I was now living inside. He answered on the fourth ring. Sienna? His voice was thick with sleep. Is everything okay? No, I said quietly. Not even close. That woke him up. I explained everything, the letter, the mortgage, my parents' calm admission that they'd signed my name without telling me. Marcus didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line felt heavy. Then he said two words that made my stomach tighten. That's fraud. I figured, I replied. No, he corrected gently. Not family drama, not a misunderstanding. Identity fraud. Hearing it framed that way made the situation suddenly real in a way it hadn't been before. Fraud. Forgery. Crimes. What do I do? I asked. First, Marcus said, fully awake now, you request copies of every document tied to that mortgage. Application, signatures, notary records. You have a legal right to them. Okay. Second, he continued, do you have any evidence you never agreed to this? That question made something click in my mind. The folder. Actually, yes, I said slowly. I told him about the email from 3 years earlier, the one where Melody had asked me to co-sign her apartment lease, and the reply I had sent back. A very clear no. I said I would never co-sign any loan for her, I explained. Marcus exhaled softly. That's perfect. Perfect? For court, he said. It establishes a pattern. You already refused once in writing. I pulled my laptop onto the kitchen table and opened the folder labeled Family Requests. There it was. The email, dated 3 years earlier. I read it again. Short. Direct. I'm sorry, Mel, but I won't co-sign any loans or leases. It puts my credit at risk, and I'm not comfortable with that. I forwarded it to Marcus immediately. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. This helps more than you know, he texted. Then he sent one more message. Also, Sienna, don't talk to your parents about this again without legal protection. I stared at the screen. For 32 years, I had seen my family as people who loved me even when they were unfair. Marcus saw something different. People who had just committed a financial crime. And that realization changed the way I looked at everything. 2 weeks later, I drove to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. Not because I wanted to. Because sometimes the only way to understand what's happening to you is to look the people responsible directly in the eye. What I didn't know was that dinner had already been planned. Not as a holiday, but as a confrontation. And the moment I walked through the door, I knew I had stepped into a trap. The driveway was already full when I arrived. Cars lined both sides, vehicles I didn't recognize, which immediately made my stomach tighten. Thanksgiving at my parents' house was usually small. Mom, Dad, Melody, Derek, the kids. Maybe Grandpa Harold if he felt up to the drive. But as I stepped out of my car and looked at the crowded driveway, something felt staged. Inside, the smell of turkey and roasted vegetables filled the house, but the atmosphere wasn't warm. It was tense. Too quiet. Then I saw the dining room. The table wasn't set for 6. It was set for 12. And sitting around it were people I hadn't expected to see. Aunt Patricia, Uncle Ronnie, 2 cousins, even Grandma Ellen. They all turned toward me at the same time. No smiles. No greetings. Just watching. My chest tightened. This wasn't Thanksgiving. This was an intervention. Melody stood up first, arms crossed over her chest. Well, she said sharply, you finally showed up. Dad cleared his throat and gestured toward the empty chair at the table. Sienna, he said, sit down. We need to talk as a family. I didn't move. About what? I asked. The room felt heavy with anticipation. Everyone already knew the answer except me. Melody spoke first. You know exactly what this is about. I kept my voice calm. The mortgage? A ripple of movement passed through the room. Aunt Patricia leaned forward, lips pursed. You know your sister needs that house, she said. This family needs you to step up. Step up. The phrase landed like a script they had all rehearsed. I never agreed to that mortgage, I replied. Melody's eyes narrowed. You said you would help. When? Christmas dinner 2 years ago, she snapped. You said you'd think about it. I did say that. And you nodded. I blinked. A nod isn't a contract. In this family it is, she shot back. A few relatives murmured agreement. Uncle Ronnie shook his head. Kids these days, he muttered. I looked around the table. Every face carried the same expectation. That eventually I would give in. That I would apologize. That I would pay. And suddenly something became very clear. This conversation had never been about truth. It was about pressure. Dad stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor. You have until December 15th, he said. My heart skipped. Until then, to do what? To agree to cover the mortgage, he replied calmly. And if I don't? He met my eyes. Then we sue you. The room went silent. Even the kitchen clock seemed to stop ticking. Sue me? I repeated. Melody spoke next. You promised to help, she said. I'll testify. I stared at her. You'd lie under oath? Her gaze slid away. It's not lying if I remember it that way. Behind me, someone sniffled. My mother. Already crying. Sienna, please, she whispered. We're your parents. I pulled my hands away when she tried to grab them. You forged my signature, I said quietly. Dad's jaw tightened. December 15th, he repeated. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to accept a $500,000 lie. Or watch my family turn into my legal opponents. I grabbed my coat. I'll see you in court. As I walked toward the door, the voices behind me exploded. Heartless. Selfish. Ungrateful. But one person didn't say a word. At the far end of the table sat Grandpa Harold. 84 years old. Quiet. Watching me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger. Not disappointment. Something closer to concern. And as I stepped outside into the cold November air, I heard the front door creak open behind me, followed by the slow tap of a cane on the driveway. Grandpa had come after me, and what he told me next would change everything. I was halfway to my car when I heard the front door close behind me. Then the slow, steady tap, tap, tap of a cane on the driveway. I turned. Grandpa Harold was making his way toward me through the cold evening air, his coat hanging loosely over his shoulders. At 84, every step looked like work. Grandpa, you shouldn't be out here, I said quickly, walking back toward him. He waved that concern away. I'll survive a few more steps, he said dryly. The porch light flickered above us, casting long shadows across the driveway. From inside the house we could still hear muffled voices, my family continuing their heated discussion like I had never been there. Grandpa stopped beside me and leaned on his cane. You did the right thing, he said quietly. The words hit harder than I expected. For weeks I'd been told the opposite. Selfish. Cold. Ungrateful. Hearing someone say the opposite felt almost unreal. Did you know about the mortgage? I asked. He nodded slowly. Not at first. A tight knot formed in my chest. But you know now? Yes. And you're still telling me I did the right thing? He looked directly at me then, his blue eyes clearer than anyone else's in that house. I tried to talk sense into your father, he said. He wouldn't listen. That didn't surprise me. My father had never been good at admitting he was wrong. Grandpa shifted his weight slightly and lowered his voice. Sienna, check the notary date. The what? On the mortgage documents. I frowned. Why? He glanced back toward the house before answering. Because something about it didn't look right. The wind moved through the bare trees along the street, rustling dry leaves across the pavement. What do you mean? I asked. But Grandpa just shook his head. I'm old, he said softly. But I'm not blind. Then he placed a hand on my shoulder. And your grandmother would be proud of you. That caught me off guard. Grandma Ruth had passed away 8 years earlier. She'd always been quiet, soft-spoken, in a family full of loud opinions. She spent her whole life letting people push her around, Grandpa continued. She used to say she wished she'd learned to say no earlier. He gave my shoulder a small squeeze. You already have. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I hugged him carefully, afraid of breaking something fragile. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded. Just check the date. That night I drove home in silence. No music. No podcast. Just the hum of the highway and Grandpa's words repeating in my mind. Check the notary date. When I finally sat down at my kitchen table, the mortgage documents from the bank were waiting in my inbox. I opened the file, scrolled past the application, past the property description, past the payment schedule, until I found the page with the signature. And just below it, the notarization stamp. I stared at the date. Then I opened my calendar. And suddenly my heart started beating faster. Because according to that document, I had signed a mortgage in Colorado on September 15th. But my calendar told a very different story. On September 15th, I wasn't even in the state. I stared at the notary stamp for a long time. September 15th. It looked ordinary enough. A neat seal, a signature underneath, the official language confirming that I had appeared in person and signed the document willingly. Except I hadn't. I opened my calendar and scrolled back through last year's entries. There it was. September 14, 17. AICPA National Conference. Seattle, Washington. For a second I just sat there, letting the information settle. Then I started digging. My email still had the flight confirmation. Denver to Seattle. Departure. September 14th. Return. September 17th. Next I found the hotel receipt. 4 nights at a conference hotel downtown. Then I opened Instagram. One of my coworkers had posted a photo of our group standing in front of the Space Needle. The timestamp read, September 15th, 4:47 p.m. I leaned back in my chair. Because the mortgage document claimed I had signed it in Colorado on that exact day. Which meant only one thing. Someone had signed my name. And someone else had notarized the lie. I scanned the signature on the document again. At first glance it looked like mine. But the longer I studied it, the clearer the differences became. My S always curved slightly backward at the top, something I picked up years ago from rushing through tax season paperwork. The S on the mortgage curved forward. Slower. Rounder. Written by someone who had seen my signature before, but had never actually watched me write it. A strange calm settled over me. Not relief. Not anger. Just clarity. For the first time since the letter arrived, I knew exactly what had happened. My father had forged my signature. And his friend, the notary from his bowling league I vaguely remembered meeting once, had stamped it as legitimate. I forwarded everything to Marcus. The mortgage file. My flight records. The conference schedule. The Instagram screenshot. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. That's it, Marcus said immediately. That's what? The break in the case. You're sure? Sienna, he said carefully. You have proof you weren't even in the state when that document was notarized. The words sent a quiet wave of relief through me. For weeks I'd felt like I was drowning in accusations. Selfish. Ungrateful. Heartless. Now I had something stronger than arguments. I had evidence. Marcus continued. This changes everything. How? Because now we're not just defending you, he said. We're exposing a forged mortgage. I looked back at the screen. At the fake signature sitting under my name. At the notary stamp that was supposed to guarantee the truth. Then I asked the question that had been forming in my mind since Thanksgiving. What happens if we prove it? Marcus didn't hesitate. Then the entire case against you collapses. He paused. and your family may have bigger problems than a mortgage payment. Before I tell you what we uncovered next, I want to say something quickly. If you're listening to this and thinking about a moment when someone tried to rewrite the truth about you, subscribe for strength. Stories like this remind us that quiet people can still stand their ground. Now, let me tell you about the email chain we found 2 weeks later, because that's when the situation stopped being suspicious and started becoming undeniable. 2 weeks later, Marcus called me on a Tuesday evening. I was halfway through reheating leftovers when my phone buzzed. The moment I heard his voice, I knew something had changed. "Sienna," he said, "I need you to sit down." That's never a comforting sentence when it comes from a lawyer. "I'm already sitting," I replied. "Good," he said, "because what we just received from the bank is significant." Earlier that week, Marcus had filed a subpoena requesting internal communications related to the mortgage application. When fraud is suspected, banks are legally required to cooperate, which meant emails, approval notes, loan officer conversations, all the quiet paperwork that normally stays buried behind the scenes. "What did you find?" I asked. There was a brief pause. "An email chain," Marcus said. "Between who?" "Your sister and the loan officer who processed the mortgage." I felt the air leave my lungs. He began reading. Email 1, sent September 10th, 2023, from Melody Brennan Cole. He cleared his throat and continued. "Is there any way to add my sister to the application without her being physically present? She's traveling for work and can't make the signing." The words hung in the silence between us. "Okay," I said slowly. "What did the loan officer say?" Marcus continued reading. Reply from Kevin Torres. "If she has power of attorney or can complete a verified remote signing process, we can accommodate that. Otherwise, she would need to be present for notarization." That sounded reasonable. Legal. Professional. But then, Marcus read the next message. Melody's reply. "She can't do remote signing. She's at a conference with bad Wi-Fi, but my dad can handle the paperwork on her behalf. Is that okay?" My stomach dropped. "Tell me the loan officer said no," I whispered. Marcus exhaled slowly. I wish he had. Then he read the final email. "As long as the documents are properly notarized, we can process the application." I stared at the wall of my apartment. Every word felt like watching a crime happen in slow motion. "They knew I wasn't there," I said quietly. "Your sister definitely knew," Marcus replied. "And the loan officer?" "He should have stopped it," Marcus said. "At the very least, he should have verified identity before approving anything." "What does that mean for us?" "It means the bank now has liability too," he explained. For the first time since this began, the weight on my chest eased slightly. Not because I wanted anyone punished, but because the truth was finally becoming visible. Marcus spoke again. "Sienna, there's something else you should consider." "What?" "You should file a formal fraud report." The words sounded heavier this time. "Against my own family?" "Against whoever forged your identity," he said carefully. "And right now the evidence points very clearly in one direction." I closed my eyes. For 32 years, these people had been my parents, my sister, my family. Now, they were potential defendants. "I'll do it," I said quietly. Marcus didn't sound surprised. "Good," he replied. Because the moment I walked into the Denver Police Department the next morning, this stopped being a family argument and started becoming a criminal investigation. The Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit was quieter than I expected. No flashing lights, no dramatic urgency. Just a waiting room with gray chairs, a coffee machine humming in the corner, and a stack of paperwork that suddenly felt heavier than any legal document I had ever reviewed. I filled out the report slowly. Name, address, nature of complaint. When I reached the section labeled Suspected Parties, my pen hesitated for a long moment. Then I wrote 3 names. Harold Brennan, Diane Brennan, Melody Brennan Cole, my own family. The officer who took my report was polite but calm in the way professionals often are when they've seen every kind of situation before. Mortgage fraud, it turns out, is not unusual. Still, when I handed over the printed emails and the conference travel records, his eyebrows lifted slightly. "This is strong documentation," he said. "What happens now?" I asked. "We review everything," he replied. "If the evidence supports it, the case gets assigned to a financial crimes investigator." I nodded. I didn't expect anything dramatic. Honestly, part of me assumed the report would disappear into a filing cabinet and never be mentioned again. But a week later, my phone rang. Unknown number. Denver area code. "Miss Brennan?" the voice said. "Yes. This is Detective Carla Nguyen with the Financial Crimes Unit." My heart started beating faster. "I've reviewed the documents you submitted," she continued. "Based on what we see here, we're opening a formal investigation." For a moment I didn't speak. The word investigation made everything feel heavier. "Real. What exactly does that involve?" I asked. "We'll contact the loan officer," she explained, "and the notary who certified the signature." Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the seriousness behind it. Mortgage fraud carries significant penalties. I swallowed. Then she asked a question that caught me completely off guard. "Miss Brennan, do you believe your family understood what they were doing was illegal?" I thought about the phone call with my father, about Thanksgiving dinner, about the calm certainty in my mother's voice when she said they had simply decided I would pay. "I don't think they cared," I said finally. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Detective Nguyen replied quietly, "That happens more often than you'd think." Before we ended the call, she gave me one final piece of advice. "Save every communication you receive from them moving forward." "I already do," I said. "Because of that folder. The one I had started years earlier when everyone insisted I was the difficult one." I added the police report confirmation email to it that afternoon. 2 weeks later, something else arrived. Not by email, not by phone, but in person. A woman in a navy blazer walked into the lobby of my office building and asked the receptionist for me. When I came downstairs, she handed me a thick envelope. "Miss Brennan?" she asked. "Yes. You've been served." Inside were 8 pages of legal filings. The title at the top made my stomach drop. Harold Brennan and Diane Brennan versus Sienna Brennan. My parents were officially suing me for the full amount of the mortgage. And according to the complaint, my sister Melody was their star witness. I read the lawsuit twice in my office before my hands finally stopped shaking. 8 pages. Single-spaced. Every sentence carefully written to make one thing sound true. That I had promised to help my family, and then betrayed them. The complaint claimed that during a Christmas dinner 2 years earlier, I had verbally agreed to assist with Melody's future home purchase. According to their lawyer, my nod of agreement had created a binding family promise. And when I later refused to pay, I had caused my parents financial harm and emotional distress. Damages requested. $480,000, plus legal fees. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For 32 years these people had been my parents. Now they were trying to legally force me to buy my sister's house. My phone buzzed in my hand. "Marcus." "I got served," I said as soon as he answered. "Expected," he replied calmly. That surprised me. "You expected this?" "Yes," he said. "When people know the documents won't hold up, they switch strategies." "What strategy?" "They ignore the documents entirely." He explained that the lawsuit never mentioned the mortgage signature. Not once. Instead, the entire case relied on one idea. A verbal promise. "They're trying to win emotionally," Marcus said. "Not legally." "And Melody?" "She's their witness." I closed my eyes. My own sister. Testifying that I had promised to take responsibility for nearly $500,000. "Will it work?" I asked. "No," Marcus said firmly. "Why not?" "Because promises don't create mortgage liability. Signatures do." That answer should have reassured me. But something else was already happening. Something outside the courtroom. The story was spreading. That evening, a friend texted me a screenshot. It was Melody's Facebook page. Her post was long and emotional. Some people care more about money than family. I never thought my own sister would watch our parents lose everything just to protect her credit score. Hundreds of reactions. Dozens of comments. Prayers. Sympathy. Support. Aunt Patricia had written, "Stay strong, sweetheart. Some people reveal their true colors eventually." Another cousin added, "Family should always come first." My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew exactly who the villain was supposed to be. I typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Marcus had warned me about this. Social media is a courtroom you can't win. So I stayed silent and watched my reputation get rewritten in real time. The hardest part wasn't the accusations. It was the realization that not one person in those comments had asked for my side of the story. Not one. They had already decided who I was. Maybe they always had. If you've ever watched people believe a story about you that isn't true, you know how isolating that moment can feel. But the real battle wasn't on Facebook. It was waiting in a courtroom. And 3 months later, that courtroom would change everything. Christmas arrived quietly that year. Not with family dinners or laughter or crowded living rooms full of wrapping paper and noise. Just silence. I found out about the Brennan family Christmas through Instagram. My nephew Tyler had posted a short video story, everyone gathered in matching pajamas around the tree in my parents' living room. Mom smiling. Dad holding a mug of eggnog. Melody's kids tearing into presents. Even Aunt Patricia was there with her usual oversized glass of wine. In the background, I could see Grandpa Harold sitting in his armchair by the fireplace. Everyone looked warm, connected, happy. Everyone except me. I hadn't received an invitation. No call. No message. Not even the polite, obligatory, "You're still welcome if you want to come." It was like I had already been removed from the family. I watched the video 3 times before setting my phone down. Strangely, the pain wasn't as sharp as I expected. More like a dull confirmation of something I had already begun to understand. The family I thought I had only existed under certain conditions. Conditions that included saying yes. My phone buzzed around 9 that evening. For a second, I wondered if maybe someone had finally reached out, but the message was from my mother. 5 words. "You chose this. Remember that." I stared at the text for a long moment, then locked my phone and set it aside. There was nothing to say. Instead, I ordered Thai food, poured a glass of wine, and spread the legal documents across my coffee table. Mortgage application. Email chain. Flight records. My quiet little apartment looked more like a law office than a home. Around 10 o'clock, another notification appeared. This time, it was an Instagram message. From my grandfather's account. That surprised me. Grandpa barely knew how to use a smartphone. When I opened it, the message was short. "I'm sorry. I tried to stop them. Merry Christmas, Sienna." That was it. But it was enough. Because in a family that had decided I was the villain, one person had quietly acknowledged the truth. I cried that night for the first time since the lawsuit started. Not out of anger. Out of relief. Someone believed me. Someone saw what was happening. Sometimes that's all it takes to keep going. If you're listening to this from somewhere in the world right now, tell me where you are. Drop your city in the comments. Stories like this remind us how many people are quietly fighting battles no one else sees. 3 months later, on a cold morning in early March, I walked into Douglas County Courthouse, and everything that had been whispered about me for months was about to be said out loud. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and industrial cleaner. I arrived 30 minutes early, partly because Marcus had told me to, mostly because I couldn't stand the thought of rushing into something this important. Courtroom 2B sat at the end of a quiet hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while my heels clicked softly across the marble floor. Marcus was already there when I arrived. Navy suit, leather briefcase, calm expression. "How are you holding up?" he asked. I exhaled, slowly, like I'm about to watch my family lie under oath. He didn't disagree. "They probably will," he said. "That's why we brought evidence." We took seats near the front. The room was smaller than I expected. Maybe 40 seats in the gallery, 2 long tables for the attorneys, and a raised bench where the judge would sit. At 8:55 a.m., the doors opened. My parents walked in first. Dad wore a new dark suit I had never seen before. Mom clung to his arm like she might collapse without him. Behind them came Melody. Her eyes were red, her makeup carefully smudged in a way that made her look fragile. Derek followed silently. Then Aunt Patricia. 2 cousins. A few other relatives who had apparently come to watch the show. They filled the gallery seats behind the plaintiff's table. Not one of them looked at me. Marcus leaned closer and murmured, "Remember, you have the truth." The bailiff called the room to order. Everyone stood. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Price, presiding. The judge entered, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses perched low on her nose, expression completely unreadable. We sat again. The plaintiff's lawyer stood first. Mitchell Davidson. Gray hair, expensive watch, the kind of confidence that comes from decades inside courtrooms. "Your Honor," he began, pacing slowly before the bench. "This is a case about broken promises." I felt Marcus shift beside me. Davidson continued. "A daughter who agreed to help her family, and then abandoned them when the bills came due." His voice carried easily through the room. "We will show that the defendant verbally agreed to assist her parents with their daughter's home purchase during a family dinner in 2022. He paused. "And we have a witness who heard that promise." He turned toward the plaintiff's table. Mrs. Melody Brennan Cole. My sister stood slowly, hands clasped, eyes lowered, looking like someone who wished she didn't have to be there. As she walked to the witness stand, I realized something strange. For months, Melody had been the loudest voice accusing me. But now, she looked nervous. Davidson smiled reassuringly at her. "Mrs. Cole," he said gently, "can you tell the court what happened during that Christmas dinner?" Melody nodded. Then she began to speak. And for the first time in my life, my sister told a story about me that wasn't just unfair. It was sworn testimony. Melody folded her hands in front of her as she sat in the witness chair. She looked smaller up there, fragile, like someone being forced to relive a painful memory. It was a convincing performance. "Mrs. Cole," Davidson said gently, "can you tell the court about the Christmas dinner in 2022? Melody nodded slowly. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "We were all at our parents' house," she said, talking about how expensive houses had become. Davidson paced a few steps. "And what did the defendant say during that conversation?" Melody dabbed at her eye with a tissue. "She said she would help." The words hung in the air. Davidson leaned slightly forward. "Can you be more specific?" "She said she would think about it," Melody replied softly. "And then?" She nodded. A murmur moved through the gallery. Davidson turned toward the judge. "In the Brennan family," he said calmly, "a nod is considered agreement." Judge Price didn't react. "Mrs. Cole," Davidson continued, "did you interpret that nod as a promise to help with the house purchase?" "Yes," Melody whispered. "And did your parents rely on that promise?" "Yes." Davidson stepped back. No further questions. My father was next. His testimony followed almost the exact same script. "We trusted our daughter," he said heavily. "We believed her word meant something." He looked toward me briefly. "I never imagined she would abandon us like this." From the gallery, I heard someone sniffle. Probably my mother. Marcus stood slowly when it was his turn. The room quieted. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice, just walked calmly toward the evidence table. "Your Honor," he said, "before I question the witness, I'd like to introduce Exhibit A." The bailiff handed copies of the document to the judge and the opposing counsel. Marcus turned on the courtroom display screen. A document appeared. 12 pages long. Mortgage application. Property address, 4847 Willowbrook Lane. Borrowers, Harold Brennan and Melody Brennan Cole. Co-signer, Sienna M. Brennan. Marcus looked toward the judge. This is the mortgage application at the center of this lawsuit. Judge Price adjusted her glasses. Marcus continued. And according to this document, my client signed it on September 15th, 2023. He paused. Then he turned toward me. Miss Brennan, he said calmly, did you sign this document? I stood. No, I said clearly. Marcus nodded. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit B. Another set of papers appeared on the screen. Flight confirmations, hotel receipts, conference registration. These records show that Miss Brennan was attending a national accounting conference in Seattle, Washington, on the date this document was allegedly signed and notarized. The courtroom grew very still. Marcus looked back at the judge. My client was 800 miles away. Judge Price leaned forward slightly. Mr. Webb, are you suggesting this signature is fraudulent? Marcus didn't hesitate. Yes, Your Honor. He turned to the evidence screen again. Two signatures appeared side by side. One from the mortgage. One freshly written by me moments earlier. The difference was obvious. Marcus pointed to the screen. The S curves forward on the mortgage signature, he explained. But Miss Brennan's real signature curves backward. From the gallery I heard Aunt Patricia gasp. My father shifted in his chair. Marcus spoke again. My client did not sign this document. And in that moment, the story my family had built for months began to crack. But Marcus wasn't finished. Not even close. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the air felt heavier. Marcus waited a moment before speaking again, letting everyone absorb what was already visible on the screen. Two signatures. One real. One very clearly not. Your Honor, Marcus said calmly, I would now like to introduce Exhibit C. He opened a second folder and handed a stack of printed pages to the bailiff. These are internal emails obtained from the bank that processed the mortgage application. The opposing lawyer stood immediately. Objection, Davidson said. Relevance. Marcus didn't even look at him. These emails directly show how my client's name was added to the mortgage without her presence or consent. Judge Price lifted her hand slightly. I'll allow it, she said. Marcus nodded once and turned toward the courtroom screen. An email appeared. He read it slowly. September 10th, 2023, sent by Melody Brennan Cole. My sister's name hung in the air. Then Marcus continued. Is there any way to add my sister to the application without her being physically present? She's traveling for work and can't make the signing. A ripple of whispers spread through the gallery. Marcus clicked to the next message. Reply from Loan Officer Kevin Torres. If she has power of attorney or completes remote verification, that can be arranged. Otherwise, she must be present for notarization. Another click. The third email appeared. Marcus read it carefully. She can't do remote signing. She's at a conference with bad Wi-Fi, but my dad can handle the paperwork on her behalf. This time, the reaction in the courtroom was louder. Someone behind me actually said, "Oh my God." Marcus didn't pause. He displayed the final email. As long as the documents are properly notarized, we can process the application. Marcus turned toward the witness stand. Mrs. Brennan Cole, he said evenly. Melody looked pale. Did you write these emails? Her lawyer started to object, but Judge Price raised a hand. Answer the question. Melody's voice barely came out. Yes. That one word changed the entire atmosphere of the room. Marcus stepped a little closer. You were aware your sister was in Seattle at the time of the signing, correct? Yes. And you still attempted to add her to the mortgage application? I thought it was allowed, she said weakly. Based on what? Melody swallowed hard. My dad said he would handle it. There was a sudden movement at the plaintiff's table. My father leaned forward sharply. Melody? Dad, you told me it was fine, she blurted out. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Derek, her husband, stared at her like he had never seen her before. Judge Price slammed her gavel. Order. But the damage was already done. Melody's composure shattered. Tears streamed down her face. Wait, please, she sobbed suddenly. It wasn't my plan. My father's chair scraped loudly as he turned toward her. Melody, stop talking. But it was too late. Because, in that moment, the story they had carefully built against me collapsed right in front of the judge. And the courtroom was about to hear the question that changed everything. Judge Eleanor Price removed her glasses slowly. Not the impatient movement of someone annoyed. The careful motion of someone realizing the situation in front of her had just become much more serious. The courtroom held its breath. She placed the glasses on the bench, folded her hands, and looked directly at my sister. Mrs. Cole, she said calmly, why does this email clearly state that your sister was not present for the signing? Melody's shoulders began to shake. Across the room, my father stared straight ahead, jaw tight, refusing to look at her. For months they had all told the same story. That I promised. That I agreed. That I abandoned them. Now that story was unraveling under oath. Melody wiped her eyes. I thought it was okay, she whispered. Judge Price didn't blink. Based on what? Melody hesitated. Then she glanced at my father. Just for a second. But it was enough. My dad said he would handle everything, she said quietly. A low wave of whispers spread through the gallery. The judge lifted a hand. Silence. Then she turned her attention to the documents again. I have reviewed the plaintiff's complaint, she said, her voice steady and precise. They allege a verbal agreement made at a family dinner, specifically, a nod interpreted as consent. She paused. Then she held up the printed email chain. I have also reviewed the defense's evidence. Her eyes moved slowly across the room. Evidence showing the defendant was in Seattle when this document was notarized. She tapped the paper once. Evidence showing the signature differs from her actual signature. Another pause. And communications from the plaintiff's own witness discussing how to add the defendant to the mortgage without her presence. My mother began crying quietly behind the plaintiff's table. Judge Price continued. This court does not enforce family expectations. Her voice echoed through the room. It enforces the law. I felt my hands tighten in my lap, because I could feel what was coming. The judge leaned back slightly. A verbal statement such as, I'll think about it, does not constitute a binding agreement. She looked directly at my parents. And even if it did, it would not obligate someone to pay $480,000 for a mortgage they did not sign. The room was completely still. Then Judge Price spoke the words that ended the case. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. The gavel struck the bench. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a door slamming shut. But the judge wasn't finished yet. She looked down at the mortgage documents again, then back at my parents. Furthermore, she said, this court is referring these documents and related communications to the district attorney's office for review of potential fraud. Aunt Patricia gasped loudly. My father gripped the edge of the table. Melody buried her face in her hands. And for the first time in 6 months, I finally exhaled. But Marcus was already standing again. Because the hearing wasn't over. Not yet. Now it was our turn. Marcus rose slowly after the judge's ruling, his voice steady. Your Honor, while the plaintiff's case has been dismissed, my client has a counterclaim to address. Davidson's head snapped up. Judge Price nodded. Proceed. Marcus turned slightly toward the bench. Sienna Brennan has filed a civil claim against Harold Brennan, Diane Brennan, and Melody Brennan Cole for identity fraud, forgery, and damages to her credit and professional reputation. A ripple moved through the gallery again. My father looked stunned, like this possibility had never crossed his mind. Marcus continued calmly. We are requesting immediate removal of Miss Brennan's name from the mortgage, reimbursement for legal fees, and compensation for the harm caused by the fraudulent use of her identity. The judge made a few notes on the file. Before she could respond, a man near the back of the courtroom stood up. Your Honor, he said, adjusting his tie. I'm Robert Hensley, compliance officer for First Mountain Bank. Every head turned. Our institution has begun an internal review regarding the processing of this mortgage application. We will cooperate fully with the court. Judge Price nodded once. That would be advisable. Then she looked directly at me. Miss Brennan, do you have anything you wish to say? I stood slowly. For a moment I simply looked at my parents. Then I said the only truth that mattered. I never wanted any of this. The courtroom had grown quieter than before. Not tense this time, just heavy with the weight of what had already been revealed. I kept my eyes on my parents as I continued speaking. I didn't ask to be placed on a mortgage, I said calmly. I didn't agree to co-sign anything, and I certainly never expected to be sued by my own family. My father's expression stayed rigid, but my mother looked down at the table, her shoulders trembling. For months, I went on, I was told I was selfish for refusing to help. I was blamed for protecting something that never should have been taken from me in the first place. The judge listened without interrupting. All I wanted, I finished, was to keep my name and my future from being tied to something I never chose. I sat back down. No dramatic speech. No anger. Just the truth. Marcus gave a small nod beside me, and across the room Melody wiped her eyes while Derek stared silently at the floor. In that moment it felt less like a victory and more like the end of an illusion. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't proving you're right. It's accepting that the people who hurt you may never admit they were wrong. If you've ever had to stand your ground like this, quietly but firmly, share where you're listening from. Stories like this travel farther than we think, and someone out there may need to hear it today.